What would you do if you discovered that the animal everyone considered worthless was actually destined for greatness? In the rolling hills of Montana, a bull named Fugitive was born with a condition that made him an outcast from the very beginning. Completely blind from birth, he was rejected by his mother, scorned by other cattle, and deemed useless by every rancher who laid eyes on him. But sometimes the greatest legends are born from the most humble beginnings, and Fugitive's story would prove that true strength comes not from what you can see, but from what you choose to believe. Fugitive came into the world on a cold February morning at the Hartwell Ranch, a sprawling cattle operation that had been in the family for 4 generations. The moment he was born, it was clear that something was different about him. His eyes, instead of the bright, alert gaze typical of newborn calves, were clouded with a milky white film that indicated complete blindness. The ranch veterinarian, Dr. Sarah Collins, delivered the devastating news to ranch owner Robert Hartwell with the kind of professional detachment that comes from years of dealing with agricultural realities. "I'm sorry, Robert, but this calf is completely blind," Dr. Collins said as she examined the newborn bull. "It's a congenital condition. He'll never be able to see, and in the cattle business that makes him essentially worthless. Most ranchers would put him down immediately rather than waste resources on an animal that can't function in a herd." Robert Hartwell, a practical man who had been raising cattle for 35 years, understood the harsh economics of ranching. A blind bull couldn't graze effectively, couldn't navigate dangerous terrain, couldn't defend himself against predators, and certainly couldn't perform the duties expected of breeding stock. In the unforgiving world of cattle ranching, where every animal had to earn its keep, Fugitive represented nothing but a liability. But there was something about the small, defenseless calf that tugged at Robert's heartstrings. Perhaps it was the way Fugitive struggled to stand on his wobbly legs, or how he turned his head toward the sound of human voices with an intensity that seemed to compensate for his lack of sight. Against all practical reasoning, Robert made the decision that would change both their lives forever. "We'll give him a chance," Robert told Dr. Collins, his voice carrying a determination that surprised even him. "Maybe he can't see, but he's got spirit. Let's see what he can do." The first challenge Fugitive faced was rejection by his own mother. In the animal kingdom, mothers instinctively recognize when their offspring have disabilities that might threaten the survival of the entire herd. Fugitive's mother, a champion Angus cow named Bella, refused to nurse him or acknowledge his existence. She would move away whenever he tried to approach, leaving the blind calf to stumble around the pasture alone, calling out with pitiful bleats that went unanswered. Robert and his ranch hands were forced to bottle feed Fugitive every few hours, a time-consuming process that drew grumbling from the other workers. "We're wasting money on that blind bull," complained Jake Morrison, the ranch foreman who had been with the Hartwell family for 15 years. "He'll never amount to anything, and we're throwing good money after bad." As Fugitive grew from a calf into a young bull, it became increasingly obvious that he was different from the other cattle in ways that went beyond his blindness. While other bulls relied on their vision to navigate the world, Fugitive had developed extraordinary hearing and an almost supernatural sense of spatial awareness. He could detect the approach of humans from hundreds of yards away, distinguish between different people by the sound of their footsteps, and navigate the ranch's complex layout with an accuracy that amazed even the skeptics. But despite these remarkable adaptations, Fugitive remained an outcast. The other bulls would push him away from the feeding troughs, block his access to water sources, and generally make his life miserable through the casual cruelty that often exists in animal hierarchies. Fugitive learned to eat last, drink last, and sleep alone, always on the periphery of the herd, but never truly accepted as part of it. The situation reached a breaking point when Fugitive was 18 months old. A group of potential buyers had come to the ranch to look at breeding stock, and Fugitive had somehow wandered into the main pasture where the prize bulls were being displayed. The sight of a blind bull among the valuable breeding animals was an embarrassment that Robert couldn't ignore. "What's that defective animal doing in here?" asked Gerald Thompson, a cattle buyer from Wyoming who was considering purchasing several of Robert's bulls. "I hope you're not trying to pass off damaged goods as quality stock." Robert's face burned with shame and anger, not at Fugitive, but at the casual dismissal of an animal that had shown more heart and determination than any other bull on the ranch. "He's not for sale," Robert replied tersely. He's a special case." Thompson laughed harshly. "Special case? He's a liability. You should have put him down when he was born. A blind bull is worse than useless. He's dangerous. What happens when he can't see a predator coming? What happens when he falls into a ravine because he can't see where he's going? You're being sentimental, and sentiment has no place in the cattle business. That night, Robert found himself standing by Fugitive's solitary pen, watching the young bull as he stood quietly in the darkness that was his constant companion. Fugitive seemed to sense his presence and turned his head toward the sound of Robert's breathing, his clouded eyes reflecting the starlight in a way that made them appear almost mystical. "What am I going to do with you, big guy?" Robert asked quietly. "Everyone says you're worthless, but I can't shake the feeling that you're meant for something special. I just don't know what." Fugitive responded by walking closer to the fence, close enough that Robert could reach out and touch his massive head. The bull stood perfectly still, accepting the gentle touch with a patience and trust that broke Robert's heart. In that moment, Robert made a decision that would prove to be the turning point in both their lives. "You know what, Fugitive?" Robert said, his voice filled with a conviction that surprised him. "I don't care what anyone else thinks. You're staying here, and we're going to find out what you're really capable of. Maybe you can't see the world the way other bulls do, but that doesn't mean you can't make your mark on it." What Robert didn't know was that Fugitive had already begun to develop abilities that would soon make him famous throughout the ranching community. His blindness, rather than being a handicap, had forced him to develop senses and instincts that other cattle simply didn't possess. He could detect changes in weather patterns hours before they arrived, sense the emotional states of other animals with uncanny accuracy, and navigate terrain in complete darkness with a confidence that amazed anyone who witnessed it. Fugitive's transformation from reject to legend was about to begin, and it would start with an act of courage that would change not just his own fate, but the lives of everyone around him. The bull that everyone had written off as worthless was about to prove that sometimes the greatest gifts come in the most unexpected packages, and that true vision has nothing to do with the ability to see. The morning that would change everything started like any other at the Hartwell Ranch. Robert was making his usual rounds, checking on the cattle and ensuring that all the animals were healthy and accounted for. But as he approached the north pasture, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. The gate was wide open, and 23 of his prize-breeding cattle were missing, including several pregnant cows worth thousands of dollars each. "Jake!" Robert shouted to his foreman, who came running from the barn. "The cattle are gone! Someone left the gate open and they've wandered off into the wilderness. We need to find them before they get too far or run into trouble." Jake Morrison surveyed the empty pasture with the grim expression of a man who understood the financial implications of losing valuable livestock. "They could be anywhere by now, boss. Those mountains are full of ravines, predators, and rough terrain. If they've scattered, it could take days to find them all, and we might lose some to wolves or bears." What made the situation even more desperate was the approaching storm. Dark clouds were gathering on the horizon, and the Weather Service had issued warnings about a severe blizzard that was expected to hit the area within hours. If the cattle weren't found and brought back to shelter soon, they could freeze to death in the sub-zero temperatures that were forecast. Robert organized a search party consisting of himself, Jake, and 2 other ranch hands. They saddled their horses and prepared to ride out into the wilderness to search for the missing cattle. As they were getting ready to leave, Robert noticed Fugitive standing at the fence of his pen, his head turned toward the open gate through which the other cattle had disappeared. "That blind bull's been acting strange all morning," Jake observed. "He keeps turning his head toward the north pasture like he's listening for something." Robert paused, remembering the extraordinary hearing and spatial awareness that Fugitive had developed. "What if he can hear them?" Robert asked, more to himself than to Jake. "What if he knows where they are?" Jake shook his head dismissively. "Boss, he's blind. Even if he could hear the cattle, he can't lead us to them. He'd be more likely to get lost himself or fall into a ravine. We need to focus on the real search." But Robert couldn't shake the feeling that Fugitive was trying to communicate something important. The bull's behavior was different from his usual calm demeanor. He was agitated, alert, and seemed to be straining to hear something that the humans couldn't detect. Before we continue with this incredible story of how a blind bull became a hero, I need to ask you for something that would mean the world to me. If you're amazed by Fugitive's story and you're rooting for this rejected bull to prove everyone wrong, please take just 1 second to smash that like button below. Your support helps these incredible stories reach more people who need to hear them. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to our channel and ring that notification bell, because what Fugitive is about to do will completely change how everyone sees him. Trust me when I tell you that this blind bull is about to perform a miracle that will leave you speechless and prove that sometimes our greatest strengths come from our biggest challenges. Now, let's get back to Fugitive and the moment that would transform him from an outcast into a legend. Acting on pure instinct and against all logical reasoning, Robert made a decision that would prove to be the turning point in Fugitive's life. "We're taking him with us," he announced to the shocked ranch hands. "Boss, that's crazy," Jake protested. "A blind bull can't help us search for cattle. He'll just slow us down and put himself in danger." But Robert had already begun opening Fugitive's pen. "Maybe he can't see, but he's got senses we don't have. If there's even a chance he can help us find those cattle, we have to try." When the gate opened, Fugitive didn't hesitate. He walked out with a confidence that surprised everyone, his head held high as he turned toward the north pasture. Then, without any guidance from the humans, he began walking in a specific direction, his gait steady and purposeful. The search party followed Fugitive on horseback, initially skeptical but gradually amazed by the bull's apparent knowledge of where he was going. Despite his blindness, Fugitive navigated the rough terrain with remarkable skill, avoiding obstacles that would have been challenging even for sighted animals. His extraordinary hearing allowed him to detect the sounds of the missing cattle from distances that amazed the experienced ranchers. After 2 hours of following Fugitive's lead, they heard the first signs of the missing herd, the distant lowing of cattle in distress. The sounds were coming from a steep ravine that was partially hidden by dense forest, a location that the search party might never have found without Fugitive's guidance. "I'll be damned," Jake muttered as they approached the ravine. "He actually led us to them." What they found was both remarkable and terrifying. The 23 missing cattle had indeed fallen into the ravine, but they were trapped on a narrow ledge about 15 feet below the rim. The ledge was wide enough to hold them temporarily, but it was precarious, and any sudden movement could send them plummeting to their deaths on the rocks below. "How are we going to get them out of there?" asked Tommy Rodriguez, one of the younger ranch hands. "That ledge won't hold their weight much longer, and we don't have equipment to lift them out." Robert studied the situation with growing desperation. The cattle were clearly terrified, and their panicked movements were causing the ledge to crumble. Several of the pregnant cows were showing signs of stress that could trigger premature labor, and the approaching storm would make any rescue attempt exponentially more dangerous. That's when Fugitive did something that left everyone speechless. The blind bull walked to the edge of the ravine and began making soft, rhythmic lowing sounds, not the typical aggressive bellowing of a bull, but gentle, calming calls that seemed designed to soothe the frightened cattle below. The effect was immediate and remarkable. The panicked cattle gradually stopped their frantic movements and began to calm down. They turned their attention toward Fugitive's voice, and their agitation visibly decreased. It was as if the blind bull was communicating with them in a language that transcended species barriers. "He's calming them down," Robert observed in amazement. "I've never seen anything like it." But Fugitive wasn't finished. Over the next hour, he continued his gentle calling while the ranch hands worked to construct a makeshift ramp using fallen logs and rope. Throughout the rescue operation, Fugitive remained at the edge of the ravine, his calming presence keeping the trapped cattle steady and cooperative. The rescue took 6 hours to complete, but thanks to Fugitive's initial guidance and his ability to keep the cattle calm, all 23 animals were safely extracted from the ravine. Not a single cow was lost, and the pregnant animals showed no signs of stress-related complications. As the last cow was pulled to safety, Jake Morrison approached Robert with a look of stunned disbelief. "Boss, I owe you an apology, and I owe that blind bull my respect. I've never seen anything like what he did today." Robert looked at Fugitive, who was standing quietly nearby, his clouded eyes reflecting the satisfaction of a job well done. "He saved them all," Robert said quietly. "Every single one of them. The bull that everyone said was worthless just proved that he's more valuable than any of us imagined." Word of Fugitive's heroic rescue spread quickly throughout the ranching community. Within days, Robert was receiving calls from neighboring ranchers who had heard about the blind bull that had led a search party to missing cattle and then calmed them during a dangerous rescue operation. The story was picked up by local newspapers, and soon Fugitive's name was becoming known throughout Montana. Dr. Collins, the veterinarian who had recommended putting Fugitive down at birth, came to the ranch to see the famous bull for herself. "I've been practicing veterinary medicine for 25 years, she told Robert, "and I've never seen anything like what you've described. That bull has abilities that go far beyond normal animal instincts." But perhaps the most significant change was in how the other cattle treated Fugitive. The bull who had once been rejected and bullied by the herd was now treated with respect and even deference. The other cattle seemed to understand that Fugitive was special, and they began following his lead during feeding times and when moving between pastures. Fugitive had proven that blindness didn't make him worthless, it had made him extraordinary. His first miracle had transformed him from an outcast into a hero, but it was only the beginning of a legend that would inspire people across the country and redefine what it means to overcome adversity. News of Fugitive's incredible rescue spread like wildfire through the ranching community, but it was what happened next that truly established him as a legend. Within 2 weeks of saving the trapped cattle, Fugitive performed 2 more miraculous acts that left even the most skeptical observers convinced that this blind bull possessed abilities that defied explanation. The first incident occurred during a routine veterinary visit to the neighboring Patterson Ranch. Dr. Collins had been called to examine a prize breeding bull named Goliath, who had been acting aggressively and showing signs of illness. When she arrived, she found the massive bull isolated in a pen, pawing the ground and displaying behavior that suggested he was in severe pain. "He's been like this for 3 days," explained Bill Patterson, the ranch owner. "He won't let anyone near him, won't eat, and he's getting more aggressive by the hour. I'm afraid we might have to put him down if we can't figure out what's wrong." Dr. Collins had sedated aggressive bulls before, but Goliath was particularly dangerous. Nearly 2,500 pounds of muscle and fury, with horns that could easily kill a human. As she prepared the tranquilizer, Robert arrived with Fugitive, having heard about the situation from Jake. "Mind if we try something?" Robert asked. "Fugitive has a way with other cattle that I've never seen before." Bill Patterson was skeptical but desperate. "That blind bull? What can he do that we can't?" Without waiting for permission, Robert led Fugitive to the pen where Goliath was pacing. The moment Fugitive approached the fence, something extraordinary happened. The aggressive bull stopped his frantic pacing and turned toward the blind bull with what could only be described as curiosity. Fugitive began making the same gentle, rhythmic sounds he had used to calm the trapped cattle. But this time, he also positioned himself at the fence in a way that seemed to invite Goliath to approach. The aggressive bull hesitated, then slowly walked toward Fugitive until they were separated only by the fence rails. "I don't believe what I'm seeing," Dr. Collins whispered as she watched Goliath's entire demeanor change. The bull's aggressive posture relaxed, his breathing slowed, and he allowed Dr. Collins to approach and conduct her examination. What she discovered was a severe intestinal blockage that could have been fatal if left untreated. He was in agony, Dr. Collins explained after successfully treating the condition. The pain was making him aggressive and dangerous, but somehow that blind bull sensed his distress and knew exactly how to calm him down. The second miracle occurred just a week later, and this time it involved human lives. A family camping trip had gone wrong when 8-year-old Emma Wilson became separated from her parents in the dense forest that bordered the Hartwell Ranch. The child had been missing for over 6 hours when local search and rescue teams were called in. Sheriff Mike Thompson coordinated the search effort, which included trained search dogs, helicopters, and dozens of volunteers. But as darkness fell and temperatures dropped, the situation became desperate. A small child lost in the wilderness overnight could easily die from exposure or encounter dangerous wildlife. That's when Robert made an unprecedented decision. "I want to bring Fugitive into the search," he told Sheriff Thompson. "He found my missing cattle when no one else could. Maybe he can find this little girl." The sheriff was incredulous. "A bull? In a search and rescue operation? That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard." But Emma's father, David Wilson, was willing to try anything. "Please," he begged. "If there's any chance that bull can help find my daughter, I'll take it." Against all protocol and conventional wisdom, Fugitive was brought to the last known location where Emma had been seen. The blind bull immediately began displaying the same focused behavior he had shown when searching for the missing cattle. He lifted his head, turned it slowly from side to side as if listening for something specific, then began walking in a determined direction. The search party followed Fugitive through dense forest, over rocky terrain, and across streams. The bull navigated obstacles with remarkable skill, never hesitating or appearing uncertain about his direction. After 2 hours of following his lead, they heard a faint sound, a child crying in the distance. Emma Wilson was found huddled in a small cave, cold and frightened but otherwise unharmed. She had been trying to find her way back to the campsite when she became completely disoriented in the dense forest. "I heard a big cow making sounds," she told her parents through tears. "He was calling to me, so I called back." The rescue made national news, and Fugitive's story was featured in newspapers and television reports across the country. The blind bull who had been rejected at birth was now being hailed as a hero who had saved both animal and human lives. Dr. Rebecca Martinez, an animal behaviorist from the University of Montana, came to study Fugitive's extraordinary abilities. "What this bull has accomplished defies our understanding of animal cognition," she explained to Robert. His compensatory hearing and spatial awareness are remarkable, but it's his apparent ability to sense distress and respond appropriately that makes him truly unique. The scientific community was fascinated by Fugitive's case. Researchers from multiple universities requested permission to study him, and several documentaries were proposed to tell his story. But Robert was careful to protect Fugitive from becoming a circus attraction. "He's not a performing animal," Robert insisted. "He's a member of our family, and he's earned the right to live peacefully on this ranch." The recognition brought unexpected benefits to the Hartwell Ranch. Tourism increased as people came to see the famous blind bull, and Robert began offering educational programs about animal abilities and the importance of giving challenged animals a chance to prove their worth. More importantly, Fugitive's story inspired changes in how the agricultural community viewed disabled animals. Other ranchers began reconsidering their policies about putting down animals with disabilities, and several programs were established to study and support animals with special needs. But perhaps the most significant change was in Fugitive himself. The bull who had once been isolated and rejected was now the undisputed leader of the herd. Other cattle followed his lead, sought his company, and seemed to trust his judgment implicitly. He had transformed from outcast to patriarch, from liability to legend. Fugitive's 3 miraculous acts, saving the trapped cattle, calming the aggressive bull, and finding the lost child, had established him as something far more than just a successful farm animal. He had become a symbol of hope, proof that perceived weaknesses could become extraordinary strengths, and evidence that every life has value and potential. As Robert watched Fugitive standing peacefully in the pasture, surrounded by cattle that now looked to him for guidance and protection, he reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. The blind bull that everyone had wanted to destroy had become the most valuable animal on the ranch, not because of his monetary worth, but because of his immeasurable contributions to the lives of others. The legend of Fugitive was still growing, and his most important chapter was yet to be written. 5 years after his first miraculous rescue, Fugitive had become more than just a famous bull. He had become a symbol of hope and resilience that touched lives across the nation. The Hartwell Ranch had transformed into a pilgrimage site for people seeking inspiration, and Fugitive's story had sparked a movement that changed how society viewed disability and potential. The most profound change came through the Fugitive Foundation, a non-profit organization that Robert established to support animals with disabilities and promote awareness about their capabilities. The foundation funded research into animal cognition, supported sanctuaries for disabled animals, and provided educational programs that challenged people's assumptions about what constituted value and worth. Fugitive taught us that what we see as limitations might actually be hidden strengths, Robert explained to visitors during one of his weekly tours. He showed us that every life has purpose, even when that purpose isn't immediately apparent. The Foundation's work had far-reaching impacts. Veterinary schools began incorporating courses on disability accommodation for animals, and several major agricultural companies changed their policies regarding the treatment of animals born with congenital conditions. Fugitive's story became required reading in animal ethics courses, and his image appeared on promotional materials for organizations advocating for the rights of disabled animals. But perhaps the most remarkable testament to Fugitive's impact was the fugitive effect, a phenomenon documented by researchers at multiple universities. Animals that had been written off as worthless due to disabilities were being given second chances, and many were proving to have extraordinary capabilities that compensated for their perceived limitations. Dr. Martinez published a groundbreaking study on Fugitive's abilities, which revealed that his extraordinary hearing and spatial awareness were just the beginning. Brain scans showed that his visual cortex had been rewired to process auditory and tactile information with unprecedented sophistication. His brain had essentially evolved to create a 3-dimensional map of his environment using sound, smell, and vibration. Fugitive has shown us that the brain's plasticity extends far beyond what we previously understood, Dr. Martinez explained in her research presentation. His case suggests that many animals we consider disabled might actually possess enhanced abilities that we simply don't recognize or appreciate. The scientific community's fascination with Fugitive led to breakthroughs in understanding animal cognition and adaptation. His case inspired new research into sensory compensation and neural plasticity, contributing to advances in both veterinary medicine and human neuroscience. Meanwhile, Fugitive continued to amaze those around him with new displays of his extraordinary abilities. He had become the ranch's unofficial weather forecaster, consistently predicting storms and weather changes hours before meteorological equipment detected them. His calm presence had a therapeutic effect on stressed animals, and veterinarians from across the state began requesting his assistance with difficult cases. The most touching aspect of Fugitive's story was his relationship with children. School groups regularly visited the ranch, and Fugitive seemed to have a special affinity for young visitors, especially those with disabilities. Children who had been told they were different or limited found hope and inspiration in the story of the bull who had overcome rejection to become a hero. 8-year-old Michael Chen, who had been born blind, was one of many children whose lives were changed by meeting Fugitive. "He's like me," Michael told his parents after spending an afternoon at the ranch. "He can't see, but he can do amazing things. If a bull can be a hero, maybe I can be one too." Stories like Michael's became common as word of Fugitive's impact spread. Parents brought children with various disabilities to meet the famous bull, and invariably, these encounters sparked conversations about potential, value, and the different ways of experiencing the world. As Fugitive aged, his legend only grew stronger. At 8 years old, he had fathered several calves through artificial insemination, and remarkably, his offspring displayed enhanced sensory abilities even though they were not blind. Geneticists were fascinated by this development, suggesting that Fugitive's adapted neural pathways might be partially heritable. The ranch received visitors from around the world, including delegations from countries seeking to implement similar programs for disabled animals. Fugitive's story had transcended cultural and linguistic barriers, becoming a universal symbol of resilience and the power of seeing beyond surface limitations. Robert, now in his 60s, often reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. The calf that a veterinarian had recommended destroying had become the most valuable animal on the ranch, not in monetary terms, but in the immeasurable impact he had on countless lives. "People ask me if I ever regret not following the vet's advice when Fugitive was born," Robert told a documentary crew filming his story. "The truth is, Fugitive saved us more than we saved him. He taught us about courage, about the importance of giving everyone a chance, and about the incredible things that can happen when we choose to see potential instead of problems." As the sun set over the Montana hills, Fugitive stood peacefully in his pasture, surrounded by cattle that still looked to him for guidance and protection. At his feet lay a bronze plaque that had been installed by the foundation, reading, "Fugitive," a reminder that legends are not born from perfection, but from the courage to overcome what others see as impossible. The blind bull who had been rejected at birth had become immortal, not because of his physical presence, but because of the enduring impact of his story. His legacy lived on in every disabled animal that was given a chance, every child who learned that differences could be strengths, and every person who chose to see potential where others saw only limitation. Fugitive had proven that true legends are not about what you can see, but about what you choose to believe. In a world that often discards what it considers imperfect, he had shown that the greatest heroes are sometimes those who succeed, not despite their challenges, but because of them. His story would continue to inspire generations, a testament to the truth that every life has value, every soul has purpose, and sometimes the most unlikely heroes create the most enduring legends.